Hello, I'm Panos Kotzathanasis, and this is Bad Accent Video Reviews. Today we're gonna talk about the latest Godzilla film, Godzilla -1, which premiered last year, but a couple of days before found its place on Netflix. Since I'm mentioning Netflix, it's also interesting to see that the Japanese content on the platform gets better and better, at least in terms of high-profile movies, because just a few days ago we also had Lumberjack the Monster, the latest film by Takashi, which is definitely something to be happy about, even if that film is not exactly a masterpiece. But okay, finding movies from these directors also, it's definitely something pleasant to see in the platform. Nevertheless, Godzilla -1 is directed by Takashi Yamazaki, who you probably remember him from Always Sunset on 3rd Street, a trilogy that is probably among the best contemporary films from Japan. And he also has some films like Returner and a number of other films that Parasite, various instances of the Japanese Parasite, which makes him probably a great choice to direct a film like that, considering the diversity of his filmography. Nevertheless, the film this time takes place during World War I, where Koichi Shikishima, a kamikaze pilot, finds himself in Nodo Island with a number of mechanics. Supposedly he has survived, even though he was supposed to, he was on a suicide mission, just all kamikaze pilots were at the time, but he managed to survive. And while there, however, and obviously having a bit of guilt for his actions beforehand, he finds a sense of calm, but right about that point, Godzilla appears, which the other mechanics ask him to do something. Since he's the only one who has seen war, the others are all mechanics, not actually soldiers. But he freezes, which leads to a number of casualties from his fellow comrades. But him surviving once more, but is even more filled with guilt, and his PTSD is rather intense. So a bit later, he finds himself in the almost completely destroyed Ginza, where upon his return, he is chastised by a former neighbor who knew him and actually tells him off for not having died in the suicide missions, which is like probably the first comment in the film. But at the same time, he stumbles upon a woman named Noriko, who also has taken under her care a baby girl called Akiko. She has named her Akiko. And gradually the three form something that resembles a family, although Koichi is still very reluctant to call them that and does not acknowledge the fact, which actually highlights the problem, the psychological problems that he has. A bit later on, luck seems to shine on the family, since he gets a job for the government, which is about removing the mines that were left from the war in the sea. And along with three other guys, a captain, an assistant, and a doctor, Ken Hidetaka Yoshioka, he is one of the key characters in the story. They start dealing with the mines. They have a very successful tactic in order to disarm them. What they do is, since they float like balloons inside the water, they use a wire from the boat to cut the wire that connects the mines to the bottom of the sea. The mines float the sea level, and then they shoot them with a machine gun from the boat in order to make them explode and essentially deem them not dangerous. However, once more, even though things are going well, Godzilla reappears and all the past trauma for Koichi comes again. And eventually Godzilla, okay, first he attacks the boat, but then he attacks the whole area. Disaster comes in humongous proportions. And since the Japanese government are not able to offer support, and the same applies to the US, who are fearing for what could the potential military involvement in the area would, how would that impact the Cold War with the USSR. So it is left to the locals to find a way to win against Godzilla. Obviously, that is not an easy thing to do, and it turns out that they have to put all their powers together and a little bit of luck to achieve their goal. Okay, as was actually always the case with the Godzilla franchise, Godzilla was never about the monster, actually, even if it has become a trademark of the Japanese industry in the whole tokusatsu genre. It's actually, Godzilla was always a metaphor, or let's say an excuse in order for the directors, the filmmakers, to portray the social, political, and historical comments. Okay, I feel that this approach found its apogee in Shin Godzilla, the previous live-action entry in the franchise, where Hideaki Anno truly shot a film, a true masterpiece, where the socio-political comments about the current state of Japan were rather interesting, intriguing, and also presented in a very entertaining fashion, reminding us the style of Yakuza Papers, if you remember the films by Kinji Fukasaku. Okay, this aspect becomes the fact that the films are not exactly only about Godzilla, let's say. This becomes apparent because usually in the movies Godzilla does not appear until some time passes, where with Shin Godzilla probably being the apogee of this approach, because there I think it's the latest that he ever appears in a Godzilla movie. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I think it's very close. This time, however, Godzilla appears quite quickly in the initial scenes even, but the regular tactic of using the master as an excuse is still there. And the comments are once more rather interesting. Okay, we have Koichi, whose trauma from the war and the disgrace he feels for not killing himself, essentially not committing suicide, as were the orders for all the kamikaze pilots. This essentially is a metaphor for, obviously, from Japan, where the trauma of the war, I think, is still there, and but also highlights the illogicality of the orders the Japanese have, since, as you can realize, having an order to kill yourself is not exactly logical, even within the illogicality that war always includes. At the same time, there is a comment on how Japan was at the time, that after the war, it was a completely destroyed country with its economy in shambles and people suffering from hunger. And okay, it was a whole mess, and we can see that throughout the movie. At the same time that this film is about the war, it's also, there is a scene with a warship named Takao appearing on the scene, and what happens to it in its confrontation with Godzilla is probably a wink towards what happened to Yamato, the gigantic warship that was the pride of Japan, but when it was sunk by the Americans, it was kind of a sign that Japan would lose the war. There is a metaphor here for that also. Furthermore, regarding the war, the concept of the mind's death, which is an issue that is actually tormenting the whole of Asia still, and it also gets commented here in a rather central part of the narrative, which Yamazaki implements also for entertaining terms and in order to enrich the action. There's also, okay, there are some good messages though, like the fact that all the Japanese come together, and when they do, they succeed. That both local scientists and the industry, which is represented here in a company called Tokyo Balloon, they were, although Japan was destroyed, they still have some successes in both regards, in science and construction and whatnot. And also the help of the little people and the whole concept of everyone coming together is also highlighted here in a rather positive and kind, maybe slightly nationalistic message, one could say. Probably the most important thing in terms of context, however, is a very small scene where the Japanese military, some of the some of the officers, let's say, they admit the errors Japan did at war with the lack of proper supply lines, the issues with the manufacturing of the military equipment, and the whole decision about the kamikaze. It's essentially extending an apology, which is not exactly what the Japanese government still admits. I think this is it's still a painful subject for Japan, and they prefer to have it pushed on the side and actually comment it. But this is not what happened here, and I found this in almost shocking and rather impressive, actually. Okay, I'm gonna leave the commenting on the monster for the ending. So let's talk about the acting a bit. We have Ryonosuke Kamiki as Koichi Shikishima, who gives a convincing performance, let's say. He highlights his drama and his psychological issues quite well. And also the way he eventually transforms me to something different and acknowledges his relationship with his newfound surrogate family. It's one of the best aspects of the film, I'd say. He is not spectacular, but he is functionable, let's say, throughout the film. The same applies more or less for Minami Hamabe as Noriko, which is a very appealing personality throughout the film, and particularly, there are some moments where we see her just from her back, and the way he emotes for hearing Koichi's harsh words is exceptional to watch. Her acting finds its apogee in those scenes. There are a few in the brief, but they are quite good. Okay, her role is not that big as Kamiki's, but I think it's very impactful. I feel the one who steals the show, however, is Hidetaka Yoshioka as Kenji Noda. The doctor with the kind of crazy hair that he has, this funky, crazy scientist vibe, but also is very kind and smart, intelligent and fashionable. Okay, the doctor was always a very crucial character in the Godzilla film, and this time there is no exception. It's really a pleasure to see him throughout the film, and it's also kind of source of a pleasant comedy that occasionally appears in the film. There is also Sakura Ando as the neighbor that we mentioned above, but her role is small, and I think she's under implemented here. She could have a bigger part, but it's always a pleasure to see her, and I'm glad that she's here also. Okay, regarding the part that takes place inside the destroyed Kinza is very well shot, and Yamazaki tries to implement an approach that is quite similar to what he did in Always Sunset on Third Street, with the many characters, the connection between them in the neighborhood, in the poor neighborhood, and meeting a sense of nostalgia that is implemented both through the coloring, the lighting, and of course the cinematography by Kozo Shibasaki, who I feel captures the whole thing in impressive fashion. It's one of the best aspects of the film again, I think, the way the neighborhood is presented. Of course, the scenes of distractions are also impressive. This is a big budget film. It's from Toho, and the SFX are also excellent with the distraction scenes, as I mentioned. Either in the sea or in the land are really, really memorable. Okay, particularly the one where Godzilla destroys the city will definitely stay on the mind of any viewer, with the technical aspect of the film finding its apogee in these scenes. Ruiji Miyazima's editing is also excellent, with the succession of different scenes from the sea to the land being ideal. And the rather fast, not rather fast, okay, relatively fast, let's say, pace, shooting the aesthetics of the movie to perfection. And since we are talking about the technical aspect of the film, Godzilla once more looks rather impressive. Okay, Yamazaki mentioned that he wanted to make the monster look as scary as possible, and it's easy to say that he achieved his goal. Okay, it's like particularly the moments where he turns the blue light on his back on and shoots the ray from his mouth are pretty impressive to watch. This is a great job on the SFX and the whole animation, or I'm not sure what they use there in order to create the monster, but it looks really good. I think it's not that big as it was in Shin Godzilla or some other movies, but it functions rather well. So more or less, that's it about the film. What we can say is that, okay, this is definitely a film that deserves to be seen in the big screen, okay, considering that it is a Godzilla and the SFX and the scenes of destruction, but the family drama, which does occasionally moves into melodramatic territory, the presentation of life in Japan after the war are also well presented, and so the film has a rather big part that it's also okay, I guess, to watch on your TV or whatever on the screen of your house. Okay, it's definitely not a masterpiece. There are some issues here. I think that the melodrama went a bit overboard, and the usual lagging that we see in Japanese films is also here. Plus, the ending goes a bit too jingoistic, in my opinion. Although not overboard, but there's still some moments there. And although it is a good film, I still feel that Shin Godzilla was much better. But again, definitely deserves a watch, and since it's on Netflix, even more so. So that's it for today. Please let us know in the comments what you thought of the movie if you watched it. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and hope to see you soon again. Have a nice day.